I don't want people to walk away thinking like I can memorize 20 and I'll be good. Like, no, the
And
point
roll the
was,
dice. Yeah.
what's up, beer geeks? Welcome back to the Advanced Cicerone FAQ series that we're doing here at Beer Scholar. We've got Will D, a certified Cicerone, who is taking the advanced exam in just 3 months with us. He's been studying for years. He's been reading about beer and doing work for years, so it's not like he's cramming everything in 3 months here, but he's got a lot of the same questions that we hear all the time. And so far, we've already covered in episode 1 of the AC FAQ, what does test day look like? In episode 2, we talked about what resources to use for studying. And here on episode 3, we're going to talk about probably the question I get absolutely the most, which is to do with memorizing quantitative BJCP information. Do you need to memorize it all? To what extent is that important? On the exam, do they give you the stats and then ask you about the beer? Or do they give you the beer and ask you about the stats, or both? And then how did me and Scott and Chris Crow all go about memorizing all that information? We all had a different approach. So I'm going to tell you my approach to start out with. And, for me, I did memorize as much as I could, but I am not good at that. I mean, it's just... I know that everybody feels like they're not good at that, but the truth is some people are more able to kind of memorize stats than others, right? We all know those people who can tell you about the batting averages of some guy in baseball from the 1980s, right? Those people, they're really interested in that stuff and they memorize it and it's important to them and it seems crazy to everybody else. And their minds maybe work slightly differently than, mine does. To me, my take on that is, this is bullshit. Why should I have to memorize all this? It's on my phone on an app. So, it's always there when I need it. But the reality is that knowing that material and memorizing a bunch of it does really help you understand how this universe of beer styles all kind of relate to each other in terms of their colors and strengths and the ingredients that they're made with, their bitterness, their balances. All of these things exist on this continuum for all beer styles, and it's surprising. Some of the relationships you will discover in memorizing that information can be really surprising and enlightening. So for me, I made an insane amount of flashcards. I constantly was doing them for months and months and months. And, whenever I had free time, I was going through those flashcards. I actually probably memorized everything for about 20 styles, where I could just absolutely tell you all of the stuff, boom, no problem. Of course, it wasn't one of those 20 styles that I got asked about in my oral style exam, So, but because I had done that and gone through so many flashcards, and I really got myself to the point where, for instance, telling the color of a beer, I could pretty much always guess it within depending where on the scale we're talking about, I could usually guess it within a point or two. Even looking at a beer, I could pretty much guess it within a couple points. So stuff like that, I just got really good at. And I took the advice. I also had this question, right? So I was friends with Nicole Ernie, Master Cicerone Nicole Ernie from the Bay Area. I lived in San Francisco. She lived in Oakland. And I asked her about this. And one thing she told me was that she had made all these charts of all the different beer styles, different categories of the beer styles, like SRM, IBU, all this stuff. And she said that was really enlightening to her because it had helped her see these relationships between all these different styles, and she discovered some surprising things about bitterness levels of different beers that you don't think of as being particularly bitter, but because the balance because of the balance of the beer, but ultimately actually maybe those IBU levels were higher than you would have imagined, stuff like that. So I did do that as well, and that really helped me understand it. Basically all around, it came together for me in such a way that I was able to make really, really good educated guesses, even though I hadn't memorized the information for like all 80 or 90 or 100 styles or whatever. And I did fine on that material on the exam. So you do need to know the stats. You do need to be able to go back and forth with the stats. Like they can ask you questions like, name a beer with these qualities that falls between, this SRM and this SRM, right? It's critical. And I think Chris Crow and Scott Fielder went even much further in memorizing this stuff. My impression is certainly for like master, you need to memorize it for everything. For AC, I probably skated by on that by not memorizing more. But what do you say, Chris Crow?
Well, so I remember vividly, you mentioned it in some older blog posts about your approach to the Advanced Cicerone exam, Chris. Mm-hmm. And when Scott and I were preparing, I think we got a lot of mixed signals about it. It was like some people were like, get to a place where you can make educated guesses, or, you're not likely to be asked about these styles. And I don't think there was a specific turning point, but I know just philosophically at one point, and maybe we're naturally predisposed to it, Scott and I, but we were just like, you know what? We're just going to do it. Like every single one, we're going to memorize all of them. Because we're not entirely sure. So we had the time. We're not leaving any stone unturned. Yeah. We're not leaving the points on the table. And so that's what we did. And I do think that Scott will describe some of his methods. Obviously, I think we varied a little bit slightly because even within your ability to memorize certain information, the kinds of memorization is a little bit different. Like I was pretty naturally predisposed to memorizing the commercial examples, which I know is not statistics driven, but Scott seems to have a much more immediate handle on the vital statistics. Right. And so that's kind of where we flipped a little bit and would help out each other on memorizing some of those. I definitely memorized via both handwritten paper flashcards and also like Quizlet style app phone flashcards. I think it's super valuable to do it both ways because even if, you're hearing from a lot of people that have taken the exam that it was predominantly statistics first and then the other way or vice versa, they're liable to do either version at any point in the exam, basically. And you do, at just sort of a fundamental level, know that you're going to approach it both ways, at least a little bit, because you're definitely going to have an essay that's about a beer style, and you're going to need to be able to regurgitate the vital statistics for that. You're also eventually going to have an oral exam about a beer style, so you're getting the beer style first, and then you need to regurgitate the statistics. And then littered all throughout the exam, you might have it the opposite, where they give you a couple of context clues about specifics, and you have to name the beer style. And so I think it's extremely valuable to do it both ways. One of the early things that Scott really helped me on, and I know this is a way that he studied too, was to just print out sheets of either the beer styles or the statistics without the answer so that you could physically write it, and just kind of like go through the whole sheet. And it was a just slightly different way of doing it. I didn't get into any of the more advanced memory system style work. If you've seen some of the beer documentaries, I know Joel Vogelbacher memorized a lot of stuff by doing the, relating numbers and commercial examples to imagery that then he could recount the relationships. Mine was way more rote memorization. I was just like, I'm just going to keep flipping the flashcard over until I get it. Yeah. And I will say, even if you fall, in my experience, even if you fall a little bit short of memorizing the statistics for every single style in the syllabus, if you're pretty darn close, yep, a lot of the questions give you enough context clues that you can fill in the gaps or you can eliminate, some of the possibilities, and that helps a ton. And then the flip side of that is I was convinced I didn't miss a single statistics related question, and I did somewhere, so it's like I thought I was going to get 100% on that section of the exam, and I did not. So, but instead of getting a barely passing score on that, I got like a 96 or whatever it was. So it definitely was worth the effort in my experience.
Yeah, I think what you're saying really goes to the fact that different people learn in different ways, and one thing that immediately rings true for me is that actually writing things down with my hand on paper helps me learn in a way that like typing some stuff up or just flipping cards doesn't. Like I do recall that I made multiple sets of flashcards that were basically the same just so that I would rewrite them over and over and over.
Yep.
What do you think, Scott? Got anything to add to that?
Yeah, for me, the big reason I remember wanting to just go and do all of them and just be able to know all 96 styles front and back was there were two people that we spoke to who took the exam, and their written exam was specifically ruined by not taking that part seriously. They did not think that it would be that specific, that there would be specific ranges like that, and that really tanked their written score. And I think one of them had even passed the tasting too, and they were like, if I would have just studied the stats, I would have just passed it the first time. And they're not taking, and they've decided they don't even want to take the exam anymore. And I was like, yeah, that's not going to happen. It sounds like free points to me if I do this. Chris is right. Those things definitely came more naturally to me. I basically felt like I was able to do what you were talking about, like what Nicole did, but just as I was doing them over and over, my brain put those together.
Yeah.
I would even specifically remember, thinking, okay, like, this particular beer also has this beer's SRM, and so if I can at least remember it for that one, then I've kind of linked those two together. There's multiple different sets of beers that have sort of a ladder system to them. All of the Scottish beers, 2.5 to 3.2 for, Scottish Light, then it's, 3.2 to 4 whatever, 3.2 to 3.8, and then it's 3.8 to 6 for Scottish Export. And then it's the same thing for the British beers, all the bitters. And it's also the same for the SRMs for all of the international, international pale, international amber, and international dark. All of the SRMs scale up perfectly. So you just find those little patterns, and that really helped me a lot. And then the other thing too is we spoke to someone, we actually got advice on just how to study better, like how the human brain takes in information. There's an Advanced Cicerone, and that's their area of expertise in their, normal everyday life, sort of field that they work in. And so I would do it at night before I went to sleep, because they told us that that's when you're relaxed, and your brain is just ready to take in info. There's no distractions. You're laying down, and you're usually not having a bunch of other stuff going on. There's not a ton of other stimuli, and you just do it for 30 minutes before you go to sleep, and you're just more likely to retain information that way.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah. And I think, I don't want people to hear what I said and think that you can memorize 20 and pass. I mean, I'm not trying to like sell myself short here or say that you can, that I really only knew 20. I mean, that's not true. That's not true at all. I mean, I studied them all like tons. I understood all those relationships, those ladders that you're talking about. And even if I didn't have the exact number in my head for one of them, like I was always going to get it really, really, really close, because I may not have memorized it all, but I definitely had gone through the effort to, you know what I mean? And I wasn't as great at memorizing as maybe, you were, Scott, but I did not walk into that test knowing 20 and nothing else, right? It was like I had done a ton of work. I just
it's good context to point out too, though, that you're also a national BJCP judge. You have a ton of homebrewing experience, and so people think that's divorced from your understanding of some of the statistics, and it's like, no, with enough context clues, you have so much experience that you can figure out the right answer, even if you didn't literally memorize it. And so I think that, coupled with so many people, I'm not a memory expert, but I think people dramatically underestimate their capacity for memorization.
That's fair. Yeah.
And I think it seems like a big hurdle, and it's also like boring, so that sucks. But the human brain is incredible, and the same way that you can regurgitate lyrics from a song that you haven't heard in a decade, that's just a different type of information that you memorized. And yeah, maybe you're better at memorizing poetry than you are at memorizing statistics, but the capacity is still there if you put the work to it.
Right. And it is a matter of like just time, right? It's a matter of just seeing that stuff over and over and over maybe even years, right? For me, like you said, like I'd been homebrewing and reading these, all these books about beer and using the BJCP guidelines for, since like 2008 or something. And I'm a national BJCP judge and all this stuff. So it's not like when I went to sit down and study for the AC exam, I was starting from like a blank slate.
Yeah, and that's, probably a good reason why Scott and I may be like, over-prepared isn't the right word, but we weren't BJCP judges. And we just knew that, like, this is kind of the first time we're tackling this information so specifically, so we're just going to do it. Right. We're just going to memorize all of it.
And it worked out. Well, it worked out for you.
Let me ask you all this real quick. For every style, you have 3 groups of parameters that can define that style. If I know, for example, Schwarzbier, if someone were to ask me, a beer that is between ABV 4.4 and 5.4 and SRM 17 and 30, I will know immediately that's going to be Schwarzbier. There's no other beer that I know of that has those parameters, right? So is it necessary that I learn the IBUs, that I learn that the IBU for Schwarzbier is 20 to 30? Like, is that necessary?
Because they might say the question might be a lager, a lager with an IBU between this and this. And you just need to know, there's only one that fits that, right? They can ask you a question like that. And here's another thing. They're not going to ask you about IPA. They're going to pull out all the weird stuff. They're going to ask you about Weizenbock and Maibach and just weird shit that is the least familiar, the least obvious stuff, And yeah, I mean, when I was doing my oral exam with Ray Daniels himself, because it was the second exam they ever gave for the AC, and so he was there with the the circus.
That's really cool.
That's a little intimidating, and I'm in there, and turns out to be a beer style that wasn't one of the ones I had like perfectly memorized. So that portion of my answer wasn't like wildly wrong or something. But, I would have rather been like Scott and just known the answer perfectly.
Sometimes they mix the clues that they give you. It doesn't give all that much away to say you might get a quantitative context clue and a qualitative one, and you're expected to name the style. And so maybe it's not going to be the super unique one, maybe you're never going to forget 16 to 22 IBUs for Munich Helles, but you also might not get that range on the exam. They might say, what's a pale lager that's from this ABV to this ABV?
Right.
And, the ABV didn't stick out as much to you, but you needed to memorize it.
Or another style of question you could get in that same vein is, here are these 4 pairs of different beers, which 2 of them most closely fit into this ABV range for their ABV ranges. And so it's not even the exact ABV range, but they both have to fit in there the best. And so you not only have to know those ones, but you have to know all of the other ones so that you could compare them and say, okay, actually, yeah, these both fit into that range that they're giving, but these ones are closer. So I'm telling you, if you've got time, everybody out there, if you've got time and you can do it. For me, I think part of it was also one thing you realize when you're wondering how in depth to go. Part of it is just so that you can feel good going to sleep at night. Like, that's part of it. Like, I didn't need to probably push myself where it was like, okay, you have to get 100% 5 times in a row before you can stop. But like, I went that far because I had to feel comfortable. Yeah. And I couldn't. It would just I would potentially just lose sleep because I just thought, do I really know them well enough? I didn't get, or I'd start timing myself. I'd say, we'll see if you can do it what's the fastest you can, how quickly can you do, if you're getting 100%, then you got to do them faster. Can you do them faster? I just tried to challenge myself in different ways. But that was to make myself feel comfortable. And Cohen, you did what you thought was, within your means and what you were comfortable with.
Well, yeah.
And so you just got to figure out what that is.
And this comes back around to some of the stuff we've talked about in other episodes and that we'll continue to talk about. But, you really do have to use your time wisely because you don't have infinite time. Learning all of the stuff in the appendix about food, learning the BJCP quant stuff, like this is, in a way, it's really easy points. Like they're telling you, know this thing. It's not like an essay question where it's like, you could read the essay question and be like, oh shit, I really didn't prep on this particular thing much. Right? Like, they're going to ask you these questions.
Yeah, and that just reminds me that this style of question too, the quantitative data, is always on the exam. And, you may study, a dozen different things about the mashing process and then not be asked any of those questions. Right. And so that feels like a sunken cost in studying, but you will not sink anything in studying the quantitative styles because you absolutely you have to know it for some version of the exam.
Right.
So it's like predictable.
So yeah, I think, the stuff that I wrote in my blog posts and my former YouTube videos, like I stand by it, but I don't want people to misinterpret it to mean that like you don't need to really memorize this stuff, that you can really, I don't want people to walk away thinking like I can memorize 20 and I'll be good. Like, no, I memorized 20 fully, but the other like 70, I almost certainly had memorized some of it and I understood all the relationships and I was able to make very good educated guesses to the extent that I passed the exam, which probably means that I really had memorized more of it than I thought. You know what I'm saying? And I have a decade of experience with BJCP
and that's just an
stuff.
honest assessment of your experience, right? And similarly, we're learning a little bit more about Will every time we talk to him. And, I know that Will has some experience in dealing with both drinking and the mechanisms for cat scale. Mm-hmm. And you're like already in the like 1% of people approaching this exam if you've like touched any of that stuff, mm-hmm. And so it's like, with the experience that you have in that subject area, that you maybe don't have to hit some of the other stuff as hard because you've got a good angle on it. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just begging people to have an honest assessment of what they do or don't know about the BJCP styles in terms of quantitative data. And when you approach this, if you're the kind of person that's like, man, I have a ton of experience with this, I'm really good at context clues, maybe I can spend a little bit of time elsewhere and still get a really good score, that's on you. But
don't fool yourself.
If you're so close, don't fool yourself. And if you're so close to memorizing it all anyway, I really think it's worth the investment.
It's one of those time management things, but these are gimmies basically. Like, they're there. So it is worth memorizing. It can take longer for some people to memorize than others and whatever, but it's super important and you do need to know it. I think that's pretty much the answer. You need to know this stuff. You don't need to know OG and FG. Did you guys get any OG, FG questions?
No, I think having a general understanding of what that means, but there was no point where they were like, calculate the ABV based on this OG and FG, or, what's the style that is this OG and this FG. So
that's one thing that you at least get a break on. Will, you said you've been homebrewing since like 2010 or something. So you understand what original gravity and final gravity, what that means and how that relates to the final ABV of a beer and stuff like that. And that's frankly gonna do you fine on the AC, I think. You don't need to memorize that. Thank God.
I've reached out to a lot of ACs about this exam, and it's so friggin' hard to understand what is that the hell is going to be on this goddamn exam, right? Like, because nobody wants to talk about it. Like, nobody wants to tell me, like, you need to know this, this, and this, right?
Yep. And
so many ACs tell me, so many ACs, there's, 159 in the world?
Yeah. You got 2% of them on this call.
Yeah, I know it's ridiculous. No, like, this is awesome. I've talked to so many. I've emailed so many different ACs, and they always say the same thing. Like, memorize BJCP.
What I'll say on that real quick before you go on is, and I think
I rant further along.
I think I've talked with Scott and Chris about this. Is that really up until this through the CC level, it's really service focused. And once you get beyond that, it gets a little more theoretical and it gets a little more, I don't know, it's like getting a master's degree or something. Like you're going beyond the fundamentals to headier stuff and a broader, deeper, not only a broader range of topics, but a much deeper understanding of those things. So yeah, I mean, I hear you. I think it sucks that you have to memorize all the BJCP data, but I also understand how much it's enriched my understanding of beer to have done it. I feel the same way about that as I felt about, taking algebra in high school and being like, why the fuck should I memorize this formula? Like, I can look this formula up any time. They made you do it, and so you did it. And then later, when you were in Algebra 2, you were like, oh, okay, now I understand why that fundamental thing had to be memorized, because now I'm seeing all these relationships. I'm seeing the spider web grow, or the pieces of the puzzle getting filled out, or whatever. It all does enrich your understanding. So,
well, and let's be real for half a second. This isn't a certification to be an intermediate Googler. It's the Advanced Cicerone exam. So yes, you think that some of the information, not anybody specifically, the proverbial you thinks that some of the information is so easy to look up that why are you being tested on it? Well, because it's not intro to statistics, it's getting a master's degree in a subject. Right. So
there's a reason why so few people have passed this exam.
Yeah.
Right? Like there is a reason why it is so exciting that I get to speak with y'all three, right? Like there is a reason why y'all three have passed this exam and hundreds of people have failed it. There's a reason behind that. And I don't mean to, be flattering. And like honestly, like y'all have done something critically correctly. There is something behind the knowledge that y'all have and that Cicerones have, and that quantitative data and analysis and understanding the relationships between certain beers, right? And it goes so far beyond just raw numbers.
It's a brutal exam, and it has a 10% pass rate, maybe significantly lower than, the New York State Bar exam. For a law exam, you go to school for years, and then you take this crash course before you take the test. And I guess what we're hoping to do here is to give you not the crash course with all the exact questions that you might face, because people can't tell you what they had on the test. I mean, you literally sign like an NDA before you take it. We can just give you all this advice that hopefully you can kind of read between the lines of and figure out what you can do to help your chances of passing. My experience studying is wildly different than Chris and Scott's. When I took it, I took the second ever one. I was by myself, basically studying for this thing. I met up with a study group once or twice. It wasn't really helpful. There was one dude that I connected with who ended up passing, and we did some tasting together, and that was helpful. But I basically felt like a hobbit in a little hobbit hole, like in my little office, like just hoping I was studying the right stuff. And and it worked out. And now there's a little more information out there. And like Scott and Chris were able to get together and really laser in on this stuff together and with a study group and with more information. One thing we've talked about a bunch is we'd like to demystify this stuff. We want this information to be out there. We want more people to be passing. When I put my original study guide out for the certified level, back in 2014, the pass rate shot up within the next year. Just getting this information out there so people know what to study, what depth they need to understand things to, and all that is really helpful. And it just demystifies the whole process. We are not wizards in a white tower. We're just people who did the work and grinded it out. Anyone can do it if you have the time and inclination to do it, I think.
The exam is still difficult, even if you take all of our advice.
Totally.
And I think a bulk of the reason that we're even doing this is to say we're trying to take a little bit of the guesswork out. It's still going to be difficult.
Right.
It's a tough exam. Scott and I, for example, we basically studied for 18 months pretty concertedly, and it was a lot of trial and error. And what's funny is I think that and quantitative data is such a good example of this. I think a lot of people think that the Cicerone program is like, there's going to be tricky stuff, or they're like out to get you. And it's just like, no, it is all on the syllabus. And actually the quantitative data is probably the most predictable thing that is going to be on the exam in several forms. And so No, it's not tricky. It's not coming out of left field. That is something that that you have to study. And our goal as beer scholars, I think, is to just try to synthesize that focus a little bit so that you don't waste your time on stuff that's irrelevant. Right. And you focus on the stuff that's actually difficult that you need to pass.
Right. Know your strengths. Shore up your strengths and then really dig in on the things that you're weak on, And the quant data stuff, nobody's strong on that. That's just some stuff you have to grind. And it sucks. But that's the answer. The answer is pretty much, you need to memorize it. You should find a method that works for you. I think mine was kind of a weird one. I think Scott's and Chris's are more normal, which is just grind it out and literally memorize it if you can.
Oh God! If I told you how I related some of those things, you wouldn't think it was normal.
Yeah, well, Joe MC Joe Vogelbacher with the memory castles. That's taking it to the next level, right? He actually talked to a world champion memory castle guy and learned how to do that, so that he could memorize it all for the MC exam. That's insane, and that's taking it to a level that maybe you need to do for the MC, right? And I guess we didn't quite take it that far for the AC.
Well, to give you all a good idea of the payoff, Scott, when you were approaching the exam and you had all the vital statistics completely dialed in, how long was it taking you when you were getting 100% every single time going through your flashcards or your stuff? By the time you had it dialed in, how quickly could you go through everything and confirm that you knew it?
Probably 15 minutes, 20 minutes maybe.
Wow.
Whereas doing it before, it was like, it would take me, if I just was trying to go through all of them once, if you sit there and you take 30 seconds for each one, you're looking at 45 minutes or an hour,
right?
If you're digging into all 96 styles.
It's no small task. I still have my flashcards from when I prepped for it, and I'm not shitting you. It's like this. The stack is like this tall just for the BJCP stuff, probably. Because like I said, I made multiple sets, so I'd be going through and I'd like get the same question like 20 cards later.
Is someone who is a certified level coming, trying to be an AC and getting the privilege to talk with 3 ACs, and just because, y'all are far and few between. I'm not trying to, inflate y'all's ego.
Please continue.
But there's a reason behind it.
I think everyone understands the difference, obviously, between quantitative and qualitative stuff. Understanding the actual data does enrich your understanding of the beer, and it provides context for all that qualitative stuff. So anyway, that's kind of brutal and just unfortunate that you were pretty much going to have to memorize that stuff. But you got 3 months to work on it. Yeah, do it before bed. That's the advice we got from the scholar. And who's also a beer scholar. It will be on the test, though. They're basically easy points as long as you do this grind. So what do you think, Will? Are you satisfied?
Yep. It's not the answer I wanted to hear, but it is the answer that I expected. And that you just have to know the numbers. You just have to just go through the syllabus, see what they want, and you just have to memorize it.
It's a lot of information, and you just gotta keep doing your reps, right? Just keep doing the reps.
Yep. When I was studying for my certified exam, and even now, what I'm doing now, I always kept in my mind, no matter what the outcome is, you're in good company.
All right, that's true.
Yeah, if you fail your AC, you are in good company, because the folks that failed with you know more about beer than damn near anybody else in the country.
That's super true. I had to retake the tasting. I didn't just crush it on the first try. I had to retake the tasting. I had a bad day. I completely flopped on one of the 3 panels. It brought my score down just enough, and I had to redo it. So, it happens.
We'll get to the tasting exam on a later episode.
Indeed. So next up, we're going to talk about focusing on particular topics and which things are more important and less important. That's going to be the next episode, and it's coming right up if you stick around for it. See you soon.
See you guys.
See ya.